Hey everybody, welcome back to Mixing Music Analog and mixingmusicanalog.com, and here on my YouTube channel, and this is another installment of subscriber Q&A where I'm gathering up all your questions on all the different social media platforms, questions that get asked over and over again, putting them into these videos here so I can help answer some of your questions. So if you want one of your questions answered in an upcoming episode, leave it in the comment section below. Before we get started, like, share, subscribe. Also go out to mixingmusicanalog.com if you want to learn more about my mixing services, and if you're into mixing with hardware, hybrid, analog, plugins, all of that stuff, I have a brand new hybrid mixing course available over at homerecordingmadeeasy.com. Link will be in the description box below. Check it out today. Okay, so here we go. Got 3 questions we're going to try to answer. Some of these I have the name of the last person that wrote in. Some of them, so many people have asked, I'm just throwing it in the soup here. So question number 1 comes in from Thomas. And Thomas asks, hey Dave, what type of cables are you using from the console to your hardware? Do you use more expensive cables? Do they really make a difference? Thomas, great question, Thomas. It's been answered, we have on this channel, by the way, if you want to see all the cabling, we talk a lot about cables, how to wire up this whole console to our I/O, to our gear. Plenty of videos on the channel. Go search the archive and check it out. But the answer to your questions is, what type of cables am I using? 90% of the cables that I'm using in this rig, especially to the SSL, is Mogami. I'm using Mogami Gold. I'm using mostly Mogami Gold, and I'm also using some Jumper Z cables where I couldn't get the Mogami Golds at the time at the lengths that I needed. They're all D-sub connectors. So from my I/O, which are my PreSonus Quantums, those are all D-sub, 32 in, 32 out, and those are going to the origin. The origin is just like one big D-sub connector. Everything is D-sub, so it's going from D-sub from the I/O, DB25 D-sub to the console. I think all of them now are Mogami Gold. There might be a couple of Jumper Z's in there for some of the shorter lengths, as I said, but that's what they had. Now, when we first installed this console, and again, if you go watch some of the videos, you'll see it, because at the time, we were having all kinds of part shortages and supply chain issues in the world in 2021 and such. And at the time, there were a couple of times where I bought some cheaper cables because I couldn't get anything else just to get things hooked up. And I had cables in here from Hosa, which generally are good cables, but I also had some cables in here from Planet Waves and a couple other cheaper companies. And I will tell you, it did make a difference. They're not built as well. Some of them could be really noisy. There was so much cabling in this studio and cabling, overlapping cabling, physically, that it got a little noisy. When I finally was able to swap everything out to Mogami Gold, this system is as silent as can be. In other words, I could turn this thing on, I could, crank there's no hiss, there's no ground loops, there's no nothing. It just sounds dead silent. And I think part of that reason is the way we did some cable managing, routing power cables away from signal cables and that kind of thing. Again, go check the videos. We got whole videos on that and a whole video on cable management, but also to the quality of the cables. I think they do really make a difference. Yes, they could be considerably more expensive, but they last forever. And so, yes, I do think it makes a difference. I guess it depends on how many cables you're going to be running in your system. If you only have a handful of cables, can you get a less expensive cable? And is that going to make or break your setup? Probably not. But when you have as many cables in this system as we have here, the cables do make a difference. Now, going from the hardware into the patch bays where there's shorter runs and they're not going 25 feet to the console, there's a lot of Procos in there, D-sub to XLR or 1/4 inch. There are some Hosa Pro cables in there as well, and those worked fine for me. The interconnect cables between the gear and the patch bays, which may only be a 2 or 3 foot run, those aren't all Mogami Golds. Some of them are, but where we didn't have any problems with the cables, we left the Procos, and the Procos aren't cheap cables, by the way. They could be pretty expensive. And the Hosa ones are probably the least expensive, and there's probably a handful of those in there as well. So, but all the longer runs, the main runs, those are all Mogami Gold. So hopefully that answers your question, Thomas. Again, don't skip out on cables. If you're into getting hardware and stuff, I tell everyone, the cabling is expensive. If you want to do a big setup like this, you could spend $10,000 just in cabling. But again, it's, your system is only as good as your weakest link. If you buy good quality cables and you take care of them, they will last you a lifetime. They're an investment. And again, I also told people, let's say down the road you decide I don't want all this hardware, and let's say I wanted to sell my console and all my gear down the road. The cabling adds a lot of value to this. Those Mogami Gold cables will retain 75% of their value because anyone that's gonna buy all this stuff needs to buy all the cables. Conversely, if you have really inexpensive cables, they're not worth anything on the resale market. So that's another way to think about it too, although that's not the first thing I think about, but it's something to consider, So cabling's important. High quality cables, I feel are important. I wouldn't buy the cheapest cables that are out there. So there you go. Okay, next question. This one I get asked by many people. I get asked this all the time, and I have been for years. But I'm gonna answer it again for you here. Hey Dave, I'm just starting out as a mixing engineer. How do I go about getting my first clients? With that, I'm paraphrasing. That question has been asked so many different ways to me. I'm just starting out. How do I get my first clients? I want to be a mixing engineer. I want to make money. Great, wonderful. Can you do it? Of course you can. Does it matter what gear you're using? Does it matter if you're using hardware or using all plugins? No, really has no bearing on that. But here's what you need to do. First thing is I tell everyone, you gotta have a website, not just a Facebook page and an Instagram page, an actual website where you can put up examples of your work, your portfolio. People want to be able to hear the latest stuff that you have and your best quality work, and you want to be refreshing that portfolio on a regular basis. Even I refresh my audio examples on my website probably once or twice a year. I'm constantly refreshing it because as you mix more, hopefully you get better, and you want to put your best foot forward, and you want something for people to be able to listen to. You don't need a super fancy website. It doesn't even have to be a paid website. There's a lot of free solutions out there where you can get a 1 or a 2 page website, but you want your own domain. You want examples of what you can do, regardless of the workflow that you're using. That's the first thing. The second thing after that is you got to do tons of networking. We talk about this a lot. You want to get your first clients, you got to network. This is a people business. You could be the greatest mixing engineer in the world, and if nobody knows about you, who cares? You'll never get a single client. So how do you do that? You have to be out on social media. Unfortunately, it's a necessary evil today. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. If you have a YouTube channel, that's how a lot of people have learned about me over the last 10 years, is from YouTube and watching these kinds of videos. If that doesn't work for you, although today, if you want to reach outside of your local area, you have to be online, right? You got to be in the social interwebs. But short of that, in your local area, go out to your local music venues and go watch bands and artists perform live. I used to do that in the early stages of my career. Every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night for at least a couple of years, I was out in all the different venues, sometimes multiple venues a night, just introducing myself, shaking hands and kissing babies, handing out business cards, telling people about what I do, sometimes offering free work to get the first clients in the door, doing things for free or doing things at a very low cost so you can get your name out there. But this is really a networking business. It really truly is. And the other thing too, if you're just starting out, to go from zero to your full-time work takes time, doesn't happen overnight. And anyone that tells you that you could get this done and you could be mixing tons of paid projects right out of the gate very quickly really has no understanding of what they're talking about. That's 1 in a million. It takes literally years to be able to build up to the point where you're working full time if that's what you choose to do. But if you're just starting out, you gotta have a website people can check out, number one. You gotta go out and network and let people know about that website. And then you gotta be also constantly, no matter how good you are, you need to constantly be improving and sharpening your skills. So I used to do an audio podcast where one of the episodes we talked about investing in your craft, meaning you need to go out and sometimes spend some money to get some training, to learn how to get better at this craft. This is a craft. If you're a mixing engineer, this is no different than learning how to play an instrument. You don't pick up the instrument for the first time and all of a sudden you're Eddie Van Halen. It doesn't work that way, right? It takes 10,000 hours, right? You hear the old saying, it takes 10,000 hours to become really great at something. Mixing is no different. It takes many years. It doesn't mean that you're not gonna start to improve and make some money and build a career while you're going to that 10,000 hours, it's a journey, but it is a journey. It's not a quick fix thing. It just simply isn't. So, website, constantly be learning and improving. Uncle Dave's got a whole online school. You want to be a better mixing engineer. HomeRecordingMadeEasy.com, go check it out. I talk about it all the time. Or whoever your favorite instructor is, and you want to be networking. That's how you get clients. And don't be afraid up front to do work for free, to develop a relationship with someone. Mix a song for somebody for free. And then you say, look, if you like this and you want to come back in the future when you have your next single ready to go, maybe we could work out a deal and you can give me a tip or something like that. But get your name out there and just mix, 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 mix. And when you think you've mixed enough songs, go mix, 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 mix some more and get better at your craft. That's how you get your first clients. There is no easy road to it. I wish there were, but there isn't. I'm still doing everything that I just said to you in the last 2 minutes, and I've been doing this now for over 20 years, and I'm still constantly pushing the ball forward down the field. And over time, I get busier and busier and busier and busier. So for everyone that's asked me that question over the last few years, that's how you do it. At least that's how I did it. And it works for me, but you gotta be willing to put the time in. So last question, again, I get asked this a couple of times in the last 2 months. I've been emailed about this and I thought I would just address it here. So someone asked me, do you offer on-site training? They're looking for an internship at a studio, but they say it's impossible to find those kinds of positions today. Do I have interns? Do I bring people in my studio and train people here? The answer to that question is currently no, I do not. The reason for that, this is a private home studio. This is not a commercial facility. I don't rent out my room to people, and therefore I just don't like bringing a bunch of people I don't know into my home. As far as internships go or on-site training and learning how to mix and stuff, it would be something I would love to consider if I ever moved out of my private home into more of a commercial space. But every time I've thought I wanted to do that and ran the numbers, you know, look at the math, does it financially make sense? I always come back and say it would cost me way more money to put my studio in a commercial building than it would be to leave it here. I wouldn't be able to make up the extra revenue to do that, and therefore I wouldn't be able to offer something like some on-site training. As far as getting an internship at a studio, again, I guess it depends on where you live. If you live in an area that doesn't have a lot of studios in it, and you're not in a music central or centric area like Nashville or LA, it becomes very, very difficult. Back in the old days, that's the way it worked. You went and interned at a studio and you started off as a runner, and then maybe over time you got in good with people there, you developed good relationships, again, networking, and then maybe you got bumped up to an assistant engineer and then maybe worked your way up. Those, for the most part, are pretty much over. Unless you go to an audio production college or school, again, where you're in networking and you're in the community of people and you know someone and you develop relationships, you might get an opportunity that way. But just cold calling, like the few people that have written into me, they don't know anything about me and they just kind of cold calling looking for an internship. Those days, unfortunately, are just not, those opportunities are just not there anymore. And I don't know that you really need that, to be honest. If you're looking to become an engineer, whether it's a mixing engineer, recording engineer, whatever, there is so much information and training online today. You don't necessarily need that. An internship, is it better to be able to sit in a room with a real engineer and learn? Of course. But again, those kinds of positions are few and far between. Again, I would love to be able to maybe do that for people at one point, but I just don't know that it's feasible. And again, most internships, there's no money. It's completely free. So you have to be willing to come in and spend your time to learn. And in today's day and age, I would say, if that were the case, start off learning. You can learn everything you need to learn online. You don't need to be in an internship at a commercial space in your area. That's ideal if you could find it, but it's very, very challenging to do that. That's one of the reasons why when people ask me about audio production school and should I go to audio school, and again, it's kind of the same answer. It all really depends. You're gonna spend a lot of money going to an audio school to learn the same things that you can learn online if you're aggressive and you're serious about it for a lot less money in the convenience of your own home. However, what you get at those audio schools beyond the training is you get the networks, you get the relationships, you get to meet people. And because this business is a people business, that's super important, and it's hard to put a price on that. You can get further if you're in it, if you're in the scene. So in other words, depending on where you live, if you're someone that wrote in this question and you're living in the in the sticks of New Hampshire, the chances of you getting an internship at a studio are almost none. However, if you picked up and you moved to central Nashville or just outside of Nashville, where there's a recording studio every 15 feet, you have a much better chance of maybe getting in. There's a lot more competition, but there's a lot more opportunity possibly. So you really gotta lay it out and talk about where do you live and all that other stuff, and are you willing to move and all of that. And then obviously, do you really need that? You don't really need it. You can make a career in this business without that. It's a little more challenging. You have to be a little bit more aggressive. But again, like I said a little earlier when we were talking about how do I get my first clients, this is a network people business. And how you network and how you meet people could be done many different ways, but without that, it's nearly impossible to break into this business and have any kind of a career. Or if you're gonna have that career, it takes way, way longer unless you network and develop relationships with people. So I hope that answers your question. No, I don't offer any on-site training at this point. I don't know that that'll happen in the future, but I've been asked that, so I thought I would address it. So that is it for this episode of our Q&A. Again, leave your questions below in the comments if you want one of your questions answered, and if you want to know anything about my studio, I'm an open book. I'll share anything I can with you to help you any way I can. Once again, go to mixingmusicanalog.com, like, share, subscribe, and check out that hybrid mixing course. The link will be in the description box below. And until the next video, I've been Dave with mixingmusicanalog.com. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching me today, and I'll see you soon.